Hello, it's Clare Dubois with session 5 of the series that I'm doing for the 1 Million Tree campaign for TreeSisters. So all the previous sessions where I have shared elements of the story thus far that are the ground laying, the preparation for the emergence of TreeSisters and everything that I'm going to be sharing with you over the next few weeks. They're in these previous sessions which are down on the Facebook page. On the TreeSisters Facebook page. So today I want to talk to you about how the trees actually became part of this, how Project GreenHands, which is it was actually the first beneficiary reforestation project that we took on, is really the father of TreeSisters. Everything that we do is a reflection of what I learned during my time working with Project GreenHands. And I also want to talk a little bit about how we notice what life is trying to bring to us, like if there are stepping stones being laid in front of us, how we recognize them, our intuition, our instincts. But before I talk about those things, I want to say that we have reached almost 37,000 trees a month, which is over 440,000 trees a year, which is staggering and stunning and amazing. And having done the interview with the Tosa Sultani for the Feminine Awakening session in the last couple of days, and understanding even more how the rainforests of our world, the tropical belt, really is hugely responsible for the rain in our world and how fast we're losing it, but just how important it is to reforest. Every tree sister that comes on board, you matter so much, and you're still coming in. So to all of you who've come in overnight and yesterday, and over the last 2 days actually, thank you so much for stepping up on behalf of the trees. And thank you for spreading the word. So many of you are doing extraordinary things, sharing every which way, letting us know what you're doing, finding contacts, finding networks. Thank you so much. You mean the world to us. So, it's interesting because in the last few Facebook Lives I've shared quite a lot about the power of grief as a tool to strongly move you in a direction that is closer to your heart and that has greater meaning. And Project GreenHands, the project that I'm going to talk to you about today, actually arose out of profound grieving and has turned into a movement in southern India. So there really is potency in understanding how the things that we try to avoid, when we stop avoiding them, they can actually serve us extraordinarily well. So my body isn't subtle at all. If it has a message for me, generally speaking, I'll burst into tears. I mean, on the subtle level, it's what I notice. And if I notice myself noticing, so what grabs my attention? And if my attention is grabbed, then noticing that my attention is grabbed, as in noticing that my system is steering towards something, like the life in me is steering towards something, and then it's very easy to completely not notice that that's happening. But if you do, it's like, okay, here's something my system is pointing me. So when it seems really important in my life, I just cry. I start crying completely spontaneously. And then I have these feelings inside of the tears, if I'm willing to feel what's inside of the tears, of, rightness or longing or some pointer that says this way and this is why. So the first 3 times I watched Lynn Twist speak, she was founder of the Pachamama Alliance. First time, and I think I saw her 3 times in a week. It was very strange how life arranged it. Every time she spoke, I cried. And she is one of the world's greatest fundraisers. And she would talk about the privilege of fundraising. And to me, back then, the idea of fundraising was like pulling teeth. Why would anybody want to try going around asking people to give money? But she spoke of it as an absolute sacred privilege. And it moved her so deeply because she was, in effect, trying to call to that part of people that part that actually longs to be in service, that longs to give back, that longs to be generous, that when we come more deeply into ourselves, we naturally are more generous. And so her whole thing was to help us all understand that raising money was a sacred privilege, essentially. And every time she spoke, I started crying. And so I knew I'm supposed to be raising money for something. I just didn't have a clue what it was. or how I would do it. And then I watched John Perkins, who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, stand up and talk about the terrifying stuff that had gone on for him in the Amazon and his learnings from the indigenous peoples of the Amazon. And again, the same thing happened. My body just started crying, and it was then I realized, wow, I'm supposed to be raising money for trees, but I've no idea how it's going to happen. And then with the Pachamama Alliance doing the symposium, which I think I talked about in session 3, which was the absolute turning point for numerous of my friends and myself, they talked about how you have to marry ecological sustainability, social justice, and spiritual fulfillment, that those three things had to come together, that if any one of them were missing, something just wouldn't take. It didn't have enough heart or soul or grounding. And so I had the same thing with the Pachamama Alliance, this incredibly strong knowing that that's what I had to find. And then, as I said in session 4, I then put down my work to find out what it was that wanted to arise in me, and took myself off to India to do a lot of yoga to try and sort my health out. And at the ashram that I was in India, there was this Project GreenHands. And I had the same reaction again. Every time they put a video on showing Project GreenHands, I could not stop crying. And it was like, oh, okay, here we are. Here's the trees. This is what I'm supposed to be raising money for. Project GreenHands arose, I think it was it 2004 or 5? The tsunami that wiped out so many villages all around that part of the Pacific. And the villages all down the side of Tamil Nadu, there were thousands and thousands of people that were killed, and it was so incredibly sudden, and that was the thing. The suddenness of the deaths meant that the villages themselves had gone into shock, and they couldn't get out of shock. And so my teacher and his volunteers were going into these villages to try and figure out, how do we help them with their lives? How do we help them get themselves back in gear when they're just destitute and devastated? And so what was conceived, which was astonishing, was they would grow tree saplings, and hand a sapling to every person that had lost a loved one, and plant it in their villages, not just because the trees would then produce this buffer zone against tidal swells, which is a large part of why coastal restoration is so incredibly important, but also because they needed a place to put their grief. They needed a place to actually start the healing process, to relate to those that had died, that had been taken so suddenly and without any warning. And they did it through something that was growing, something that they could tend, so they could tend their own hearts and simultaneously heal and restore life. They planted something like 25,000 trees in the space of a matter of weeks with thousands of these people, and started to restore these villages. And what they saw that was so extraordinary was, as these men, women and children were tending these trees, suddenly they switched back onto nature. Suddenly they wanted their whole villages full of trees, and suddenly they started tidying up all the rubbish that was strewn all over the place. And it was almost like the relationship between tree and human started to not just heal their hearts, but heal their relationship with nature, which was when they decided, okay, we've got to do something. Let's do a major experiment with Project GreenHands and see how many trees we could plant in a day. So they had the Guinness Book World Records for a little while there, with something like 880,000 trees in a day. But from there, again, it was like, okay, we can inspire people, but how do we make tree planting literally part of everyday life? How do we, when Tamil Nadu essentially is facing rapid desertification, they've lost something like 12 of their major rivers. They're having to sink boreholes deeper than they've ever gone before, and they're basically saying that tree roots won't even get down that far because the water table's dropped because of industrial agriculture, essentially, and the fact that they're destroying their forests. So the big question, and it's a question all around the world, how do you help people move deeply into relationship with trees? And through that deeper relationship with trees, can we actually call ourselves back into relationship with nature? So they started going into all the villages where agriculture was essentially dying because the lands were dying and the people were destitute. And it wasn't as simple as, okay, we need you to start planting trees and then we can actually bring the ground back, we can bring the soil back, and we can bring the water back. We need to help these people. Because if there is no direct connection, if somebody is just sort of almost dead to themselves, it's too much of a leap to go in and say, okay, let's create life. There was this profound understanding that they had to help these people to heal and these people to come back into their wholeness before then giving them another tool that would bring them into greater connection with life. So they would go into these villages and they would start playing with the children, and then they would start teaching yoga and meditation, and then they would start teaching volleyball. And so they were tending to the spirit and to the soul and the psyche of these people. And then they would get this sort of wonderful competitive game making going on. And once the games were established, then they would bring in the trees. And so when there was interest and there was life and there was heart and soul back, then it was, now can we tend these trees? Can we reforest your village? And can we help you reforest this entire area? Villages of life. And then the next villagers would come in and they would see what's happening and they'd want to start planting trees. And the next villagers would come in and they'd want to start planting trees. And suddenly they were planting millions and millions of trees on an absolute shoestring as an act of profound love. And I was witnessing all of this and it was like, wow, how are they doing it? They've got the army helping with the saplings, next to AIDS victims, next to single mothers, next to school children and employees in a caste culture where everyone is so divided up. The trees were bringing everyone together. And so I was in this place of, wow, if you can do it in India, you can do it everywhere. And okay, so over there, everything's turning to desert. It's much more urgent. I mean, our weather's also going bonkers, but they're running out of food. You know, it's going to happen very severely. And so there's kind of like this imperative to get everyone together. But nevertheless, if they could do it there, why couldn't we do it here? And so I was supposed to be doing the fundraising, funnily enough, you know, raising money for trees for Project GreenHands. But my interest, my passion was for the social strategy. How were they doing it? How was it working? You know, how did they get millions of people engaged with the trees? And so I started studying it. I started interviewing all the employees. I started working with the people who were leading it. And all the time it was like, what is it? What's this secret recipe? And what was amazing for me was I thought I'd nailed it. You know, I thought, right, it's these 7 things. And they are essentially, number 1, think big, like capture the imagination of the people, give them hope, give them something to live up to. So be really audacious. Number 2 was educate, help them understand how doing this helps themselves, helps the land, makes sense, is logical. Number 3 was engage heart and soul and build relationship. Bring the whole person in. Help it have the extraordinary meaning that it does and let it, you know, really build bonds between people. Then there was number 4, level the playing field. Help us understand that no matter where we are or we place ourselves in any social structure or financial structure, we're all the same. We're all the same. We need the same things. We have the same longings. We're all facing climate change. Number 5 was get your hands dirty. You know, really make this practical, do something earthy in the ground, start planting yourself. It can't just be a distant thing. We need that actual felt relationship with nature. Number 6 was celebrate, make this joyful, make this something that just inspires creativity and hope and passion, and at every point that you possibly can, celebrate where you've got to. And very important, create a sense of collective ownership. This belongs to all of us. And so I had this like, wow, this is why this is working. Now I want to bring this to the West and see who I can find who will actually deliver this in some way and start a major reforestation campaign in the West. And literally 3 days later, I was called to London to go to a communications strategy for another organisation, and that's when I had the car crash that gave me TreeSisters. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about tomorrow, because I think I'm going to try and tell that story in a way that I've never told it before, get back inside it, because life lined up the creation of TreeSisters. Life had me studying for 3 years this strategy that Project GreenHands offered, that they're delivering so well out there. And this is the strategy that has underpinned the creation of TreeSisters, and is everything that I'm effectively handing to you, handing to all TreeSisters out there who want to help hold this with me, because this isn't a one-woman show. This isn't just my team. This isn't just the TreeSisters network as is. This is an offering and a gift and a message. There was an extraordinary message that came in with the car crash, into a tree, of course, that is for all of us. And yeah, I want to share that with you tomorrow. So for now, what I would say is, please watch the other Facebook Lives. See if you can allow yourself to notice in those Facebook Lives what touches you. See if you can allow yourself to be touched by the call of nature as it is right now, and the call of the trees. See if you can find any good reason not to start giving back to the trees, when we know that every single thing that we're doing is warming our planet, and there is a direct way to cool her down. Please bring your love. Please bring your generosity. Please join the Million Trees campaign. It's just milliontreescampaign.com, or come to TreeSisters and go to the join page. When you become a tree sister, you're not just standing for the trees, you're standing for other women. You're standing for a world that understands and recognizes the value of the feminine principle. Everything that we bring that is about deep relationship and care and love and nurture of life and future generations. And all our tree sisters, we find a lot of different ways of giving back to you, to nurture our nature connectedness, to nurture our bodies, to nurture our relationship with each other. Please come and discover us. Please share the word. Become a tree sister today. And hopefully you'll be with me tomorrow when I share how TreeSisters arrived in this extraordinary car crash, fully formed, with a message of great hope for all of us. Talk to you tomorrow.